If a person hears the word doctor, for instance, it will be easier for them to understand and process the word nurse. This process will be quicker than processing the word butter, because in your mind it is believed that there is connections between the words that have semantic connections. And also this is the same for syntactic constructions. For instance, if you hear the sentence, the construction worker was hit by a bulldozer, which is a passive construction, you are more likely to describe the following event using a passive construction as well, because it is believed that this is activated in your memory because of the previous stimulus. So this is what we're mainly going to be talking about. And I also want to talk a little bit about Book and Lobel's study and why it is so important for us. So priming, we're going to talk about syntactic priming to be specific. Syntactic priming is believed to operate on a surface level. So, for example, if we have a construction such as the construction worker was hit by a bulldozer, because this construction has a determiner phrase, auxiliary verb, and prepositional phrase, this construction is considered to be the same with the construction worker was digging by the bulldozer, because they both have the same surface constituency. So according to psychologists, because they have the same surface constituency, they're considered to be identical. And Bock and Lobel, what Bock and Lobel did was that they claimed that if a person hears a locative prime, such as the construction worker was digging by the bulldozer, they said that this will activate and have the same priming effect as the construction worker was hit by a bulldozer. Okay, so this is what Bock and Lobel found. Bock and Lobel found that people, their participants, are just as likely to produce passives after locatives as well as passives. So they claim there is absolutely no difference between these two. So for a moment, I would like to leave priming aside, and I would like to talk about the key concepts that shape my hypothesis for this study and the reasons I actually run this experiment. Firstly, I would like to talk about the minimalist program of generative grammar. This is a very well-known and accepted phenomenon by the linguists of the 20th and 21st century. So according to Chomsky, language involves movement, and the sentences are pronounced at their phonological form. So in their landing sites after the movement. However, what is important here is that it is claimed that the constituents are actually interpreted in their launching sites, so before movement. This is a very, like I said, accepted and well-known idea according to linguists. However, most psychologists don't accept this view. Most psychologists simply don't accept that there is any movement at all in language. They simply say that there is no empty categories and no movement in language. So they think that language is a simple, shallow level of syntax. Okay, so this is a syntactic tree of a simple sentence. She will give a speech. This tree is drawn according to the minimalist program, and you can see that the subject NP, she, actually originates in the specifier of the VP, and is moved and left a trace, and it has moved to the specifier of the TP. This is basically what I was talking about in movement. This is what is accepted by linguists. If we move on to something a little bit more specific to our study, here we can see two trees. The first one being the locative tree and the second one being the passive tree. So Here you can see that the surface constituent structure is completely identical. It both has DP, auxiliary verb, a verb, and a prepositional phrase. So they're completely identical. However, because we've drawn these trees both according to the minimalist program, you can clearly see that there is actually some differences. They have a different argument structure, and on the tree you can clearly see that they are actually represented differently. However, like I said, because psychologists don't accept that they have different representations, they don't accept the movement, it seems like they're exactly the same. But this is the view that I will be talking about. I will be forcing the idea that this is how syntactic representations are in locative and passive primes. This is important for us to see that they have different syntactic structures. Okay, so, but I would like to again talk about another important thing to my idea is argument for prominence hierarchy. So, what is arguments prominence hierarchy, APH? APH is a important scale which is believed to influence the grammatical prominence within a given sentence. What do I mean by that? I mean, for example, if we have an action where we have an entity of a large orange ball suddenly appearing and hitting an already existing black ball, you are more likely to describe this as an orange ball is hit by a black ball. The reason for this is because the orange ball has appeared out of the blue without any expectation. It is more salient, it's more important to the speaker. Therefore, the speaker wants to make it clear that this is the thing that's surprising and not the black ball. So a passive construction was created and the orange ball was used in the very beginning of the sentence. The other important thing for us, and the main thing that we're going to be focused on in this study, is the hierarchy created by Tito in 2017. This is the plus and minus presupposed, plus and minus referential, plus and minus human, and plus and minus inanimate. So this hierarchy is very important for languages such as English, where it has a very limited morphological system. So if, for example, we're talking about an event such as a construction worker being hit by a bulldozer, because the construction worker is plus human and the bulldozer is an inanimate constituent, you can tell from this hierarchy that the construction worker is more important to the speaker. Therefore, you're expected to see something such as the construction worker was hit by a bulldozer, because the speaker will want to make it more prominent and pronounce the more prominent thing in the sentence first, rather than creating a sentence like the construction, so the bulldozer hit the construction worker. Okay. Okay, so what did we do in the present study and why did we actually end up doing it? So first of all, I would like to explain the findings of Bock and Lobel. My hypothesis was that the reason Bock and Lobel found that locative primes also activate passive sentences was because they were using unequal animacy. So they were using humans and inanimate objects, And because of this unequal animacy, the participants were more likely to use passive constructions. So this wasn't actually a fair experiment. I claimed that this experiment was kind of flawed. So what did I do in my experiment? I basically replicated Bock and Lobel's study exactly with very minor changes. So I kept the experimental procedure identical, and all I did was I controlled for animacy in order to make sure that this will not affect the participants' choices, which I will talk about in a minute. Okay, so I would like to talk a bit about the experimental procedure. We had 28 native English speakers who were adults, and we created 18 priming triplets. These triplets basically looked like this. So we kept the same people and tried to keep the same action. And what we did was we created 3 triplets. So we created sentences like, the schoolboy was intimidated by the small ferret, the schoolboy was crouching by the small ferret, and the schoolboy was patted by the small ferret. So in the study, we created 18 of these. So we had 18 triplets. And then we also created animations. We also created target animations, which I will show in a minute as well. And we had a lot of additional items, because this experiment was basically given to the participants as a memory task. We didn't want the participants to understand what we were looking for, due to fairness reasons, obviously. So we gave it to them as a memory task. Therefore, we used the fillers. What they were asked to do was they were given a sentence. For example, one of these sentences, they were given in terms of audio. So they heard the sentence, the schoolboy was intimidated by the small ferret. And what they were asked to do was they were asked to repeat the sentence, and then they were asked to describe the event that followed. So the events that followed, we created on our own. We draw these images, and we use 2 to 4 frames to create these animations. Of course, we were careful with the color saturation, and all of the backgrounds were all black, were all white, sorry, to make sure that it didn't affect anything psychological. And our animations ended up basically looking something like this one, which I cannot show. One second. Okay, so I'm just going to. Oh my God. Okay, I think I got it this time. Here. Okay, so the target events basically looks like this. Just play that again. So it will look like this. So they have the equal animacy. So that definitely didn't affect it. We made sure that they weren't affected. And we did the procedure I explained. So they were given sentences, and then they were asked to explain it. Okay, so what did we find at the end of the experiment? So this is a table of the average proportions of proof passives responses produced across conditions and lists, because we had 3 lists, and each person had 1 list. I think I forgot to mention this. And for example, every person was exposed to only 1 of the 3 sentences, but they were hearing all of the conditions at different times. Okay, so the results demonstrated that there were more full responses heard after passive primes compared to actives, and more importantly, not after hearing locative primes. But the proportion of passives was only numerical, and this effect was not seen in terms of statistics. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see again the average proportion of full passive responses produced across conditions. And if we basically talk about what this meant for us, was that our main hypothesis was that we will see less passive responses because we expected the locative primes and active primes not to actually activate any passive responses. And upon examining the three lists, we saw that the passive producing full passives and actives producing full passives only differed by 1.78%, which was not the desired effect. We weren't expecting to see something this little. We were expecting to see something much, much more. The results we got from this in the first place were quite disappointing and was not what was expected from the study. However, after studying the lists and this graph and the statistical information, we realized that there was actually a problem with one of the lists. If you look at list 3, you can see that according to this list, the locative condition actually primed a lot of passive responses. But what was interesting was that active primes primed more passive responses than the passive prime, which was a big problem. And this meant that this list was defective for some reason that we could not see. Because what we expected to see and what we were meant to see if all the lists were correct was to see the green column, the passives column, to be the highest. We wanted to see most passive responses primed by other passive responses, but we did not see this. And what we found here is that list 3 was very defective and there was something wrong with this list. What we thought here was that perhaps maybe it was something like the people were more likely to produce passives in locative condition, maybe because of the individuals, or perhaps because of the creation of the list. We could not exactly tell the reason. But because we knew that this list was definitely defective, what we did was we ran another ANOVA, another statistical analysis, only on list 1 and 2. And when we ran list 1 and 2 only, we found a very, very different result. We found that an absence of difference between an active and locative conditions, and this suggested that locative sentences do not actually prime passive responses. We find the probability of this being 1.00. So this was a definite result. This was even a result that was better than what we were expecting. And these results indicated that although passives and locative constructions have the same surface structure, this basically supported the idea that they have different and distinct argument structures, and the fact that priming is sensitive to this. And what did we conclude in the study? My proposal stands obviously in the opposition to the claim that priming is driven by shallow syntactic representations, despite the fact that a lot of psychologists believe that this is the case. And the view that was initially brought forward by Bock in 1986 and by Bock and Lobel's study in 1990, which was replicated in the study, this became a very, very popular view. But I am standing very strongly that there was big flaws in the study, and that was the reason that the results were found. So although we had problems with list 3 in our study, I still, from the statistical results, we can still say that list 1 and 2, the results run in list 1 and 2, suggest that there was problematic points in Bock and Lobel's study, perhaps because they didn't control for animacy. Locative primes also seemed to prime passive responses, although they actually didn't. So the current experiments where the animacy distribution in the targets were controlled for indicated that passive constructions were more commonly primed by passive primes, and contrarily to Bock and Lobel's findings. Contrarily to Bock and Lobel's findings, locative primes do not prime as many passive constructions as passive primes, so indicating that there is a syntactic and argument structural difference between these two. Unfortunately, I cannot make a very strong claim about lists 1 and 2, because when we excluded list 3, we only had about 18 participants in the study, which, as you can tell, was very, very limited. This is very difficult to say something for certain. My next goal with this study is to run the same study with more participants and to understand what was defective about list 3. And like I said, have more participants and run the study again, and hopefully have more reliable statistical information as well. Okay, thank you for listening to me.